Basically, I'm an editor who works on the marketing team for Disney. So my role involves sort of taking the old works from Disney and not transforming, like exporting it to a digital format, whether that be for social media, for the streaming services, Disney Plus, and sometimes even for digital formats, like the DVDs and stuff. That really depends on the content. Most of them, we have sort of issues with the aspect ratio because it's changed a lot over the years. And we had a lot of debates whether or not we should maintain the original screen size or if we should stretch it. Because sometimes when you stretch it, you miss some of the details that the original work had in it. Some parts get cut off, or it just doesn't look as good because it's kind of pixelated in a way. Eventually, what we decided on was just to have it optional, so the viewer can choose whether or not to maintain the original screen size or to have it adapted for modern screens. What is really difficult, though, are the really old animations, because often they don't have any sound. What they were originally intended for was to be played in a live audience and therefore having a live piano play over it. A lot of the times we don't know what the original soundtrack was supposed to be for certain animations. Sometimes we can find the music sheets for them, and then we just call someone in to compose that track. Other times we ask someone to sort of guess what it might have sounded like and then sort of compose a track for that. So yeah, that stuff can be difficult. We sort of have a lot of discussions on what the modern audience wants to see, especially with some of Disney's more controversial old cartoons, that the racism and the sexism, stuff that wouldn't really fly nowadays. We do have a lot of conversations over what does go through and what doesn't. Most of the time it isn't up to me. Sometimes it's cut, or sometimes it's censored. We get animators to draw over the more controversial looking characters and make them into something that's more kind of socially acceptable. Other times we leave it alone, and we just put a disclaimer at the beginning. Not long, actually. This is my first year. Great year to start with, right? Just instantly finding a hidden, creepy animation. But yeah, I haven't really been doing this for that long, if I'm gonna be honest. I mean, yeah, kinda. A lot of the old content can be a bit uncanny and disturbing, but it was a product of its time. Goofy used to be like a raging alcoholic. Donald once had a nightmare about being a Nazi, but I think most people know about that one now. This animation in particular, the one we're talking about for this interview, it was pretty weird. With the other examples I listed, I could kind of understand why they were made, considering the time period, but this one wouldn't really have been received back well then either. I don't think it would have done. It was brought over to me with a bunch of other film reels. For the Disney 100th anniversary, we were considering releasing some of our lost archives to Disney Plus. It's nothing too interesting, really. Most of them were just too short, or they were missing music and other aspects. Disney couldn't really find a way of releasing them before. A lot of them weren't DVD quality, and it didn't seem worth the time or money to release them. But now that we have social media and Disney Plus, we can get away with releasing these shorts even if they weren't the best. We thought it would be a good way to commemorate history and show that the studio has gone through many phases of quality over the years. Well, first of all, it was not labeled that, and it wasn't labeled Mouse.AVI either. I doubt they knew what an AVI even was back then. No, it was literally just called Mouse Walk. So I didn't really know what to make of it, but I'd seen titles with even more vague sort of titles as well, so it didn't really seem too surprising, I guess. When I exported it onto my editing software, I noticed that the audio track was completely flat. Mind you, I did have the timeline zoomed in at this point, so I couldn't tell if the whole animation was silent, but I just kind of assumed that it was, because like I said earlier, a lot of animations just had no sound, so I thought it was just another one of those. So basically the animation just starts with Mickey Mouse. He's walking down the street with this, like, completely neutral look on his face. I can't really describe the expression because there just kind of wasn't any. It was just completely flat and dull. He was just kind of staring at the ground while he was walking, had his hands behind his back, and the background just seemed to be like a city that he was walking past. I kept expecting him to do something, like literally anything else. I expected him to enter one of these buildings or arrive at his destination, but he never did. It was literally just looped animation of him walking down the same city. It just kind of went on forever, or at least it felt that way when I was watching it. So I started skipping through the video, but it was just the same stuff. Like, nothing seemed to change no matter how far I skipped into it. I then noticed that the video was 9 minutes long, and I just remember thinking, is it seriously just 9 minutes of walking? No, not really. I just assumed it was like a test animation. The only thing unusual about it was the length of the video. I've seen animation tests before, even a few walk cycles, but they've never been this long. It was odd because they would have had to have made a conscious effort to do that, you know? Like, it's not like today where you can accidentally export a video that's too long when it's not supposed to be. They would have literally had to have added those same looping frames to the film reel, so that did strike me as odd, but, like, I didn't really think anything of it. Well, about 6 minutes in, it was literally just a black screen, and it was 9 minutes long, so I just assumed that the other 3 minutes was just gonna be black, and that was it. So I just sort of let the timeline just, like, keep going. I just started thinking to myself, like, what am I gonna do with this clip? Like, is anyone gonna be interested enough to watch Mickey walking for, like, 6 minutes straight? I didn't even know how to describe it. Like, the video is just called Mouse Walk, so I guess it was just an unused walk cycle. You know, it didn't have a story, it obviously had no sound, so I didn't really think it would be entertaining to the average viewer. Although I thought maybe it would be interesting to, like, animation students, you know, to see some, like, tests from the older days, I guess. And I just sort of went into a daze thinking, like, you know, how am I gonna pitch this? Should I put it on Disney Plus? Or maybe some kind of behind-the-scenes feature on a DVD somewhere? And then suddenly, the animation just cuts back in. It kind of made me jump, because I was just sort of lost in thinking. And it was the same clip. It was Mickey walking in the street again, but this time there were actual sound waves in the timeline. So this is a point where I zoomed out in the program to see if the last 2 minutes had sound. And what I saw was, not only did it have sound, but later in the track, the sound waves were massive. At a lot of the points, it was actively peaking, so I kind of turned my volume down at this point, after seeing that, knowing for whatever reason that something really loud was going to happen. I mean, the piano was already really annoying and unpleasant to listen to, so that's kind of another reason I turned the sound down. It didn't really sound like a song, it was just someone kind of mindlessly banging on the keyboard like a child. So I don't know, it didn't sound great. I then noticed that Mickey's expression had changed. It was really subtle. I kind of didn't notice it at first, but, like, before he had, like, this really neutral expression, and now he had, like, a very slight smile. So, yeah, it took me a second to notice it. And as the animation went on, his smile got a little more, let's say, disturbing, I guess. You know, it kind of got more toothy, it started taking up more space on his face. And at one point, his eyes just straight up fell off and rolled onto the street where he was walking. And it was about that point where I started to feel really uncomfortable. Morbid curiosity, I guess. I started staring at the timestamps, and then I saw that there were still pretty much 2 minutes left, even though the first minute had felt like 2. So it was kind of nearing the second minute when I thought, the first minute had already passed, or both of them had passed. It was weird. Basically, I thought it went on a lot longer than it actually did, and because I was staring at the timestamps, it meant that I wasn't directly looking at the screen. So then I noticed it was coming up to the point in the timeline where the sound waves were peaking, and even though my volume was already quite low, I turned it down even further, and what I heard was someone screaming. Just straight up someone screaming into the microphone. Even at the low volume that I was listening to it with, I could still tell that the sound quality was just beyond awful. I've already mentioned the peaking, but the screaming didn't even sound like it was done by a professional voice actor. I know it might sound strange, but it does take a lot of talent to make an effective scream. Even the smallest grunts in voice acting are supposed to sound characterized, but this scream just sounded aimless, and I could hear the person's voice starting to dry near the end. And after the screaming had stopped, the noise had changed to crying. Again, it wasn't like a professional sounding voice actor cry, it was an ugly cry. It was kind of gross. You could hear the mucus in their mouth and their nose building up. I was starting to think that someone had just recorded someone else having a mental breakdown, which would explain the poor sound quality. So around this point, Mickey starts covering his ears. He finally stopped walking and just kneeled over in pain. He started wailing himself, and this made it clear to me that it wasn't supposed to be Mickey crying in the scene, as his crying was done by his official voice, or at least what sounded like it. It sort of sounded like maybe Walt was voicing Mickey here, but don't quote me on that. I don't really know. It's difficult to tell when he's just making noises rather than saying actual words. And then the background just sort of tilted like a Dutch angle, and Mickey just continued to wail and cry along with this other voice in the track. I could see his back moving up and down as he was hyperventilating, and he was breathing so heavily that you could see the edge of his spine. It just kept building heavier and heavier until his breathing started to slow and stutter, and eventually stop. The music and the screaming cut off completely, and I was left staring at Mickey's still body. So then the classic Mickey title card appeared at the end, but there was no credits. I was pissed, not gonna lie. I had just assumed it was a prank by someone in the studio, because there's no way that Disney actually made something like this, I mean, right? Like, even if it wasn't released. I couldn't really ask anyone about the video, though, because I'd been working late. And yeah, there were also a few people who were working late as well, but they seemed really stressed. They wanted to meet their deadlines, and I didn't really want to bother them with this, so I just kind of went home for that night and I tried to forget about it. No, I mean, the video was creepy and all, but I'm not really easily scared. It was in the back of my mind, sure, but at the time I just remember feeling really annoyed rather than scared. It wasn't how I wanted to end my workday, let's just put it at that. Absolutely. It was like the first thing I did. I can't imagine I came off very well. Some of my colleagues were a little concerned with how much energy I had so early in the morning. And then when I explained the content of the animation that I found, they kind of thought that I was joking. You know, no one fessed up to pranking me, and the idea seemed out of the question. The reel itself was found in the official archives, and it was even signed by Walt. So it seemed official enough. I knew I wasn't going to get anywhere with just explaining it, so eventually I just showed them the animation, or at least the ending of it anyway. There was a lot of confused silence. Everyone just sort of looked around at each other, unsure what to make of it. I mean, like I said earlier, it seemed to be official enough, but unlike the animations that I've exported in the past, there was no record of this one, like not even a date for when it was created, so we were just kind of all lost, and we weren't really sure what to think of it. I mean, my best guess is that it was something Walt either made as a dark joke, or perhaps some sort of cry for help. Maybe he was going through something, and he wanted to express it through his art. Maybe it wasn't Walt himself who made it, but like a depressed animator with an idea that never got approved for obvious reasons. Honestly, I have no idea. I did some digging with the old records dating back to 1923, but I couldn't find anything related to it at all. Definitely not on Disney Plus. It's a little inappropriate for children to see, not to mention kind of boring. I mean, there's a chance, but it wouldn't come directly from the studio, I don't think. Disney are very protective of their brand. It's one thing to admit that this animation exists, but to show it is a whole other issue. Yeah, I would, but I put a disclaimer explaining what it is first. I think it deserves to be seen as a part of Disney's history. Not everything that came from the studio was happy, you know? In a way, I think I was kinda lucky to have been able to see a hidden piece of Disney's work, even if I don't fully understand it.